New Buddhaware Dhamma Talks. Jeff Hunt presents a talk on some aspect of the Buddha's teaching.
There is a teaching of the Buddha called the 8 worldly conditions. What seems to drive human life and how we can make adjustments once we become mindful of what is driving our human life. So the Buddha is very good, or maybe his followers were very good packaging his teaching. I don't think he would have taught in terms of the 8 of this, or the 4 of that, or the 3 of this. This is a mark of oral tradition where people are trying to remember what it was that someone taught. So 8 worldly conditions, I think, is just a nice little package for you to think about what is important in your lives and what is driving your life. So what are the 8 worldly conditions? Well, there are 4 positives and 4 negatives. The 4 positives, or what we regard as positive, that is what we regard as positive, right? And this is for us to think about, are pleasure, praise, fame, and gain. Pleasure, praise, fame, and gain. So the 4 negatives that drive our lives are the opposites of those. So the opposite of pleasure would be pain or discomfort. The opposite of praise would be blame. The opposite of fame would be obscurity, or maybe even more strongly, humiliation. And the opposite of gain is loss. Now, if you think about it, it's quite a nice little entree into mindfulness of living one's life, in that it gives you a way of, if you like, interrogating yourself, of understanding this thing that you take to be yourself, question your life. So if we take them one at a time, pleasure is not just pleasure in the narrow sense. Pleasure is also comfort, entertainment. I think it goes without saying, in the Western world in particular, the pursuit of pleasure and entertainment is a major industry. Right? A major industry. Not only is it a major industry, it is a major preoccupation and motivating force in our lives. And this is something fairly new, although you'd have to have some historical sense to understand how new this is. It's only in the last 100 years in the Western world that entertainment has come to seem like a right that we have. Before then, people were much too busy surviving and dealing with their families and with the more basic problems of life. And entertainment or pleasure had a narrower context of moments when one were perhaps eating with the family or having a special festival day or something like that, which would be connected with the meaning of life. But in the Western world, we have now detached pleasure and entertainment from any background of meaning whatsoever. So sex is entertainment and nothing to do with families or babies anymore. Then when you think about the whole industry of eating, for example, we don't eat in families so much. We tend to go out and eat in a restaurant. We tend to go to movies. We tend to go to huge football matches involving tens of thousands of people. We go to pop concerts involving tens of thousands of people. We take this now for granted. To us, this is the new normality. So we act as though it has always been like this, and it will always be like this. We go on cruises in huge ships, carrying several hundreds or even a couple of thousand people at a time to other parts of the world. We fly about, putting tons of carbon into the air to have a holiday on somebody else's beach in a culture which may be alien to us. And they've thrown up hotels to keep us entertained, okay? It's all normal, isn't it? But it's not actually. But now we all do it. The damage to the environment is immense. And the damage to communities elsewhere is immense. But we take it as normal and natural and as good. This is the Buddha's teaching. The pleasure is hugely attractive to us. So attractive that it can become obsessive. The Buddha is not a spoilsport. He's not saying that we should never have pleasure. he's basically saying, I suppose, look at the context, look at the proportionality of it. There are things which are more important in life than having pleasure. Difficult though this is to believe nowadays, the idea that fun is the main purpose of life is very recent. Very, very recent. And you may be disappointed to hear that this is not going to go on very long, not very much longer, because of the damage that we are doing to the environment, to other species, to communities, and to ourselves. So like all things, this obsession with entertainment and fun will come to a resounding, crashing end in the next few decades. What are we going to do then? What are we going to do with our time? Where are we going to find the meaning of life when it's not the pursuit of fun? The Buddha's got a very important teaching there. Now, again, I have to emphasize that he's not against pleasure. He understands perfectly well. He talks about sukha. Sukha is happiness, pleasure. But, there's pleasure in the family, there's pleasure in the community, etc., which gives things a different context, a different sense of proportion. So, the Buddha's teaching is that there is a danger in the things that attract us, but we don't seem to notice the danger. We get attracted into it until it becomes destructive, becomes self-destructive. And it's only then, when it becomes destructive, that we start to notice that something is wrong here. So the first one is pleasure. The opposite of it is pain. Nobody wants to have pain. Whether physical pain, mental pain, any kind of pain. It's something to be avoided at all costs. Well, again, pain is a part of life. And pain, the eradication of pain is actually almost certainly impossible. And yet we live with the illusion in the Western world that we can eradicate it completely. Ask a woman who's having childbirth what is pain. It's not every society that has thought that pain is an entirely bad thing. And there are lessons to be learned from pain, actually. But in the Western world now, we think that we somehow, science and technology will completely eradicate it and then we can live without pain. So the avoidance of pain is also a massive industry. Go into a chemist and see how many preparations there are for the avoidance of pain. Dozens, if not hundreds. Not all of it is doing us any good, actually, because then we wonder why we have all sorts of secondary problems created by the medications themselves. And some of these things, of course, become addictive. At the same time, the Buddha doesn't actually think that pain is a good thing, and perfectly understands that, that is something that we need to address. But he also thinks that pain is unavoidable and that one can learn a lot from pain if it is in the right context and if it is proportional to other things in life, that even pain can be given meaning. So it's not something necessarily to run away from. So the Buddha is suggesting that if you actually, are mindful about our human behavior as individuals and as groups and as society at large, we'll see that we are driven largely by pleasure seeking and pain avoidance. Right? Second one, praise. All of us like to be praised. We all like to be patted on the head and told, you're great, you're wonderful, you've done a good job, etc., etc. Again, the Buddha knows this is perfectly normal, perfectly natural. Right? And the opposite of it is blame. Now, it's a very interesting thing that the Buddha always mentions is that, we human beings are unstable. We're unstable because we have the capacity for consciousness and for free choices. But because of this instability, we tend to swing from one thing to another. So we're either seeking praise or we're avoiding blame. Now watch some of the so-called soaps on television, such as EastEnders, which I often mention, because all of human life is in EastEnders. And see how much of it is seeking praise or is blaming others. Now, the Buddha says quite a lot about blame, actually, because blame is pointing in the very opposite direction to the one that he is interested in, insofar as that direction is likely to bring us more peace. What are we doing when we blame someone? We're saying, it's not me, it's you. You made me angry. The anger is not mine. I'm not taking charge of the anger. The anger is not my issue. You made me angry, so it's a blame. Now, if we go on doing that through life, everything else is everybody else's responsibility and none of it is mine. So we never learn anything. We are stuck in a cycle of blame. We can blame the government. We can blame the politicians. We can blame the banks. We can blame women, or we can blame men, or we can blame Muslims, or we can blame Hindus, or we go on in this catastrophically ignorant fashion and learn nothing at all until we learn to look into ourselves and then find that that is where the issue actually starts. That is what mindfulness is about, is when you can look into yourself and say, no, I don't want to go in the direction of blame, because that is something that I am doing, right? It's a reaction. It's a tendency that we have is to project outwards and push everything outwards, right? But the Buddha's teaching is the opposite. To be mindful, to look in and learn about one's own states of mind. So blame is going in the opposite direction because it's throwing things back out again. And we don't notice that when we're doing that, we're actually disempowering ourselves and undermining our own intelligence. Now, the Buddha says you get angry with someone, you pick up a hot coal to throw at them because you're angry with them. You're so angry with them, with blaming them, that your own hand is burning from the hot coal. But you don't notice that. So you are suffering from your own tendency to push everything outwards. But if you can say, okay, look into myself, my hand is burning. Shouldn't do that. Shouldn't throw things at people. Because I'm the one that's suffering and I'm remaining in ignorance. Let me deal with myself first. Let me be honest about anything that arises in my mind. What am I doing when I'm seeking praise? Boosting my ego, consolidating myself. Again, within certain bounds, there's nothing wrong with this. If you have children, you will probably praise them. I praise my own grandchildren, but I'm very careful what I praise them for. We can praise people for the wrong thing, and how much we praise them, until we have a strong desire to be praised all the time. It gets to a point where it's not actually productive. So, pleasure, praise, fame and gain. Now we move to fame. What is fame? It sounds a lot like praise, but it's actually different. Fame is where you want recognition by everyone. Again, this is about inflating the ego. And again, the Buddha says it is the self that is the problem. Why are we seeking fame? What is so attractive about fame? If we actually look at people who are famous, most of them are more miserable than the average person, because fame actually brings them a lot of trouble. And then they have to spend a lot of money protecting themselves from others, have bodyguards and the rest of it, and barbed wire fences around their property. They've got the fame that they wanted, and now they live in fear. Bit sad, isn't it? It's better not to be famous, I think. Okay? And obscurity. See, fame is about self. Obscurity is about the fear of the self being threatened, of the self not being recognized. Now, when people feel like that, they eventually will do terrible things. Obscurity and humiliation are very painful. To give an example, many cases in the United States and sometimes in this country of young people picking up a gun, going into a classroom and shooting everybody. It seems very puzzling, doesn't it? Why would they do that? When you look into it, it's generally because they feel nobody's paying any attention to them, they feel humiliated, they feel unimportant, and the only way they can reassert themselves is say, no, I am here, And I'll show you that I'm here by being destructive, because being destructive is very easy. Being constructive is more difficult. So if I'm suffering the pain of obscurity or humiliation, one way I can draw attention to myself is to do something absolutely awful. Now we see this politicized. We see this in the world at the moment. Switch on the news. It is not good to humiliate people, and it doesn't feel good to be humiliated. So we should never humiliate others. We should never look down on others. We should never demean others for any reason whatsoever. If you watch a program on television like X Factor, anybody watch X Factor occasionally? I bump into it from time to time. Some members of my family watch it. You know, it's a song contest where young people are singing, and all of them are very emotional about it, even before they sing. Some of them are crying even before they sing. And they will tell you how much they want this. I really want this. I really want this. You think, yes, you and a few million other people, because it's embedded in the human condition to want fame. And what happens when only one person wins and the other 100 lose? You've got 99 people who are miserable and sobbing, and some of them getting very angry. I mean, Simon Cowell has been threatened several times, and there are a couple of bodyguards just off the stage there. Because they haven't got the fame. What is the matter with us? When are we going to learn to look into ourselves and see the destructive nature that we've got, but also the capacity that we've got for love, generosity, kindness, cooperation, because that is the way to go if we really want peace in this world. So that's the third. So we've got pleasure, praise, fame, and its opposite. And finally, the real big one, gain. Gain is having more of stuff. More money, more possessions, more property, bigger building, swimming pool, bigger car. Now, when you've got 7 billion people playing that game, it can only end up in one place, which is destruction. Because there isn't enough material on this planet for us all to live at the level of a middle-class person here in Surrey, England. It's just impossible. In fact, we've gone well beyond that boundary already, and we are living on something like 1 1/4 or 1 1/3 planets, which means that we are borrowing now from future generations. So, you see the truth in the teaching of somebody that was trying to teach us 2,500 years ago. He could already see the direction. Even though he knew nothing about aeroplanes or climate change or tourist holiday resorts, or he knew nothing about any of it. Nothing about mobile phones and computers, nothing. But he could see into the human spirit, into the human heart. He could see what we were like, which he calls ignorance. But he could also see the capacity for us to move out of that through self-understanding, by deploying our consciousness to turn it around and look into ourselves and see, okay, this is destructive, this is hurting me and hurting others. This is actually enlightening me and enlightening others. So that's the direction to go in. But to know the difference, one has to be able to look into oneself, which is what meditation ultimately is all about. Pleasure, praise, fame, and gain. In the Western world, we have so much stuff that the loft is full of it, the garage is full of it, and even there are now storage companies which will keep even more of it in case you haven't got room for it in your loft and your garage. Right? We have an economic system which is based on gain. It doesn't matter how much destruction it causes. It's gain. Where is this gain coming from? Are we to fall back on blame and say, well, it's due to capitalism, or it's due to capitalists? Who are these capitalists? They're human beings like you and me. We're all playing the same game, to some extent, in some way. It's only when we can stand back from it and say, no, this cannot go on like this. There has to be another way. And sufficient number of people are beginning to see that light, finding alternative ways of living. less possessive, less gainful. Because you see, all of us ultimately do want peace. We do want cooperation. We do want compassion for each other when we are suffering. Isn't that right? We all would like greater wisdom, but there is no wisdom in just chasing more gain. And what is the opposite of gain? It's loss. Loss is one of the biggest industries on the planet. It's called insurance. Fear of loss. If you fear loss, then someone can make money out of it. In this country, insurance is one of the biggest businesses. It's the center of insurance for the world. We think Lloyd's, for example, is one of the biggest organizations in the world with billions of pounds behind it. But I think of the advertising to get us to insure. What isn't insured? We've got the house insured, then we've got the stuff in the house insured, then we've got the car insured, and then you've got your life insured, and then you've got your health insured. Then you've got the cat insured, and you've got the dog insured. We've got the plumbing insured and the gas insured. The 8 worldly conditions give us some insight. Of course, it's just a sketch, of how we are. Things are a bit more complicated than that. But when it comes to mindfulness, it gives us another little prop, another channel that we can direct our mindfulness to in interrogating ourselves and others, and to say, okay, that actually is the way of ignorance, that is the way of suffering, that is the way of what in Buddhism is called samsara. But there is another way, and we're capable of the other way. The other way can only come through self-understanding, where we begin to see that this is destructive. It is also the source of unhappiness and misery. But it can only be kick-started not by blaming someone else, or getting angry with the angry person, or bullying the bully. That just repeats the cycle. It can only be through self-knowledge and self-change and helping to propagate that till we all come to say, right, that makes sense. Let's go in that direction. That makes sense, because the way we're going doesn't make any sense, and it can't go on like this. There is hope, and the hope is actually in our own capacity for consciousness, for self-awareness, for mindfulness. But we've got to take the time out from the cycle of the 8 worldly conditions. That's why we are here, isn't it? We're taking time out. We have time just to think, where's my life going? What am I doing? What am I? Where are we all going? What's it all about? Why is the world the way it is? Why is there so much misery and exploitation and war going on? Is this inevitable? Because that would be the pessimistic position, wouldn't it? The pessimist would say, well, it's never going to be any different. That's not the Buddha's view. But then he's not a blind optimist either. He thinks work has to be done, and the work is in self-understanding. Pleasure, praise, fame and gain, and avoidance of their opposites. Just use that little framework sometimes to think about yourself, but also about the human race at large, all 7 billion of us.
New Buddha Way lets go of East and West and starts afresh in the life we have now. For more information, visit www.newbuddhaway.org.